It started so small, almost unnoticeable. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. After all, Michael had always been busy with work. But lately, every time his phone lit up, I saw it. The way his shoulders stiffened, the way his eyes darted toward me before he slid the phone into his pocket. The ringtone used to make us laugh. He had chosen something ridiculous years ago, and we'd joked about it for weeks. But now, that same sound sent a chill crawling up my spine. He never answered in front of me anymore. Instead, he'd slip into the hallway, close the door halfway, and lower his voice until I could barely make out a murmur. I tried to push the doubts aside. I told myself it was just work, just stress, just me being paranoid. But every time he disappeared with that phone pressed to his ear, it felt like another brick stacking between us. A wall was slowly being built, one I couldn't see over. And deep down, a quiet voice kept whispering to me that something was very, very wrong. I began to notice the timing most. The calls never came when we were apart, never at his office, never during his golf games, never when he was running errands. No, they always seemed to arrive when we were together. Dinner on the table, a glass of wine in his hand, laughter between us, and then, that buzz. His fork would clink against the plate as he pushed back his chair, slipping away as if the air had suddenly turned too heavy to breathe. When he returned, he'd wear that same polite smile, the one that used to melt me years ago, but now felt practiced. I'd ask, "Who was that?" in what I hoped was a casual tone, but my stomach would tighten while I waited, and he'd always answer, "Just work stuff, you wouldn't understand." The words were like a lock clicking shut, sealing me out. I'd nod, pretending to accept it, but inside, I felt a tiny fracture forming. The silence between us grew louder than any argument could have been. Nights at the dinner table stretched into something unbearable, filled only with the scrape of cutlery and the ticking of the kitchen clock. I kept telling myself that trust was the foundation of marriage, that doubt was poison. But in the quiet, when the phone lit up again and he slipped away, I felt the poison spreading. Something was breaking, and I wasn't sure it could ever be fixed. One evening, I tried to follow him. He had barely picked up the call when he excused himself, heading down the hall with that same tight expression. I stood by the sink, dish towel in hand, listening. Just faint murmurs, a laugh that wasn't his usual laugh. It was softer, secretive. My chest ached, but I stayed still, pretending to fuss with the plates. When he came back, he kissed the top of my head, his lips brushing my hair like a stranger's. "Just a client," he said again, avoiding my eyes this time. The more he dismissed me, the more I felt invisible in my own marriage. I smiled and swallowed the lump in my throat, letting him believe I bought every excuse. But when the phone buzzed again the very next night, I didn't even flinch. My instincts were screaming, but I knew better than to confront him without proof. Trust was supposed to be the glue that held us together, yet here I was, starting to wonder if I'd been living beside a stranger all along. And that's when a dangerous thought began to form in the back of my mind. The moment I had been dreading came on an ordinary Tuesday night. Michael's phone buzzed on the dresser while the sound of the shower roared in the bathroom. He hadn't bothered to lock it this time. My heart pounded in my chest so hard it felt like it was echoing in the room. I stared at the screen, frozen between loyalty and suspicion. The number flashing across the glass was one I didn't recognize, but it wasn't the first time I'd seen it. In fact, I realized it had appeared over and over again, always at the strangest hours. My fingers hovered, trembling. I knew I shouldn't, but I tapped the screen anyway. The call log lit up with her name, unknown to me, but all too familiar in frequency. With shaky hands, I copied the number, my breath short and uneven. I wanted to call, demand answers, but fear surged up and strangled me. What if I heard her voice? What if my world shattered in that instant? I pressed call, and just as a soft, "Hello," came through, I panicked and hung up. My reflection in the black screen stared back at me, eyes wide, lips trembling. That quiet whisper inside me was no longer just suspicion. It was confirmation waiting to be faced. Later that night, while Michael slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing, replaying that faint "hello" over and over again like a cruel echo. It wasn't a client's voice, it was a woman's, gentle, playful, almost expectant. My stomach twisted, and for the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own bed. I slipped out quietly and sat in the kitchen with my laptop, the glow of the screen highlighting the tears I refused to let fall. I typed the number into a search bar, my fingers stiff, my breath shallow. When her social media profile popped up, I felt my chest collapse. There she was, a woman I didn't know, smiling in photos, tagging herself at restaurants I recognized. Places Michael had been, places he said he'd been for work. The realization hit like plunging into ice water. Those hushed conversations weren't about late-night clients or endless projects. They were about her, about stolen moments, whispered promises, and lies delivered with that same easy smile he gave me. I closed the laptop, my hands cold, my heart colder. But instead of breaking down, I felt something else rising inside me, something sharper, more dangerous. And that's when the idea began to take root, quietly, like a seed waiting to bloom. The next morning, Michael greeted me with his usual charm, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter like nothing was wrong. I watched his hands, steady and confident, the same hands that had held mine through births, losses, and birthdays. But now I couldn't stop picturing them touching someone else. I smiled back, a quiet mask I wore so easily, and he didn't notice the storm brewing inside me. All day, the number burned in my mind like a brand. Who was she? What did she have that I didn't? My heart ached, but beneath the ache was a clarity I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't paranoia. It wasn't insecurity. It was truth, plain and cruel. And I had it saved right there on my phone, waiting for me to uncover the rest of the story. I could have confronted him right then, slammed the evidence onto the table, and demanded an explanation. But what would that give me? More lies, more denial, more promises that meant nothing. No. If Michael thought he could hide behind whispers and locked doors, let him. I would be patient. I would be silent. Because sometimes, silence is the sharpest weapon of all. And soon, I'd learn how to use it. From that night on, I became two people. To Michael, I was still the patient wife, the one who smiled when he left the room with his buzzing phone, pretending not to notice the change in his voice. But behind closed doors, I was someone else entirely, a woman taking notes, connecting dots, quietly sharpening her weapons. Every call he made, I logged the time. Every excuse, I stored in the back of my mind. I found myself moving like a shadow through our home. While he showered, I'd scroll through his call history. When he left his briefcase unattended, I'd peek inside, finding little clues. Receipts from restaurants we'd never visited together, hotel keycards he claimed were from a client meeting. My heart didn't race anymore. It beat slow and steady, each thump a reminder. You know the truth now. Don't let him see it yet. The hardest part was acting. Laughing at his half-hearted jokes, nodding at his tired excuses, letting him believe he still had me wrapped around his finger. But if he looked closer, he might have seen the shift, the way I no longer clung to his every word, the way my eyes lingered a second too long when his phone lit up. I was no longer his blind, trusting wife. I was a woman biding her time. And in that waiting, a plan was already beginning to take shape. I started small, collecting proof like a careful gardener picking thorns. A screenshot here, a forwarded voicemail there. At first, my hands shook each time I touched his phone, terrified he'd catch me. But soon, the fear faded into focus. Every little piece of evidence was another brick I laid on my side of the wall, a fortress of truth to protect me when the time came. In the evenings, when Michael claimed he had calls he couldn't miss, I would sit silently, pen in hand, writing down every minute he disappeared. Sometimes I caught whispers through the door, fragments of sentences dripping with intimacy. Words no colleague would ever use. I wrote them down too, each one slicing deeper, but I didn't flinch. I wanted the sting. It kept me awake. It kept me sharp. Finally, I reached out to someone who would understand, my lawyer. She didn't gasp, didn't coddle me. Instead, she leaned forward, eyes steady, and reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. Our marriage contract had a no infidelity clause. If I proved what I suspected, everything would turn in my favor. My heart didn't leap at the thought. It simply steadied, like a woman who had just found her weapon of choice. But the real game was only beginning. Every day after that, I played my role flawlessly. I cooked his favorite meals, laughed at his stories, even kissed him goodnight like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was cataloging every detail, every suspicious glance, every whispered word. My silence became my shield, and strangely, my power. He thought I was in the dark, when in reality I was already 3 steps ahead. One evening, he excused himself during dinner, again. I didn't stop him. I simply sipped my wine, letting its bitterness coat my tongue as I quietly tapped the time into my notebook. Through the crack of the door, I caught just enough. Her laugh, his low murmur, the sound of a promise not meant for me. I smiled when he returned, as if I hadn't heard a thing. That night, as I closed my eyes beside him, I whispered a different promise to myself. He had built this wall of secrets brick by brick, and I was done watching in silence. I wouldn't knock it down with rage. No, I would let him finish building it, until he trapped himself on the other side, and when he least expected it, I'd be waiting. Sunday morning arrived with an eerie calm. The house smelled of coffee and fresh bread, sunlight spilling through the curtains like nothing was amiss. Michael sat at the table, flipping through the newspaper, humming to himself as if we were the perfect couple in some glossy magazine spread. I watched him, studying the man I thought I knew, and felt an unsettling steadiness settle over me. For weeks, I had been waiting for this moment. My lawyer had told me, "When you're ready, you'll know." And she was right. I wasn't nervous anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was resolved. I had the call logs printed, the screenshots saved, the receipts tucked neatly into a folder on the counter. Proof doesn't tremble. Proof doesn't lie. Proof doesn't love you, but it protects you. He looked up at me, smiling like he always did, oblivious to the storm gathering in my chest. "You're awfully quiet today," he said lightly, reaching for his coffee. I met his gaze, steady and calm, and that's when I told him we needed to talk. He chuckled nervously, pretending it was nothing. But the second I pulled the folder across the table, his hands froze midair, and the color drained from his face. I slid the papers across the table, the sound of them scraping against the wood louder than his shallow breathing. "These aren't work calls, Michael," I said, my voice steady, almost calm. He didn't reach for the folder. He just stared at it, his lips parting, his Adam's apple bobbing as though he'd swallowed something sharp. His hand twitched, then hovered over the pages, but he couldn't bring himself to flip them. "Julia, it's not what you think," he stammered, his voice cracking for the first time in years. I watched him carefully, the man who once told me I was his everything, now shrinking under the weight of his own lies. It was almost pitiful. Almost. I pulled out my phone, laying it beside the papers. One tap, and the screen lit up with the same number that had haunted me for weeks. Then I opened the saved messages, the ones filled with promises and passion that were never meant for me. "She calls you at dinner. She calls you in the middle of the night, and you call her back." My words landed like stones in the silence. He had nowhere left to run. He finally opened the folder, his fingers trembling as he scanned the call logs, the hotel receipts, the screenshots of messages I had quietly collected. I watched his lips move silently, as if reading them back would somehow change the words. His face went from pale to flushed, then drained of color again, like a man drowning who can't find the surface. "I can explain," he whispered, but I cut him off before the lies could start again. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes without blinking. "No, Michael, you don't get to explain. You signed that contract, remember? The one that said if you betrayed me, you'd lose everything?" My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Calm, cold truth was more powerful than any scream. That's when the front door clicked. Michael's head jerked up, confused. I didn't flinch. I had been waiting for this. My lawyer stepped into the kitchen, a folder in her hands, her expression firm and unreadable. Michael looked from her to me, his lips parted in disbelief. He had no idea that the calls he'd hidden so carefully had already written the ending for him. and I was about to turn the final page. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream could have been. Michael sat across from me, his mouth opening and closing like a man searching for air, but no words came. For the first time in years, I didn't rush to comfort him, didn't try to soothe away his discomfort. I just watched, calm and steady, while he finally drowned in the very lies he'd spun. Within hours, the lawyer slid the papers across the table with the same precision I had used with the phone records. "You knew the rules," she told him firmly, her voice sharp enough to cut through his excuses. I sat back, hands folded neatly in my lap, feeling strangely detached. This wasn't about rage anymore. It was about justice, and I had all the evidence I needed. By the next morning, the house felt different. His suits were gone, his toothbrush missing from the holder, his scent fading from the sheets. I walked through the rooms we had once shared and felt no urge to cry. The emptiness wasn't painful anymore. It was cleansing, like opening a window after a storm. But what came next, the way the truth would echo far beyond our four walls, was something he could never have prepared for. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I simply let him carry his boxes down the front steps while the neighbors peeked from behind their curtains. His face was tight with shame, but I offered no explanations. If they wanted to gossip, let them. If they wanted to ask, let them wonder. His silence, the very thing that betrayed me, was now turning into his punishment. When the last box was gone, I stood in the doorway watching his car disappear down the street. I thought I'd feel broken, but instead I felt taller, lighter, almost reborn. For once, the ache in my chest wasn't from doubt. It was from release. I closed the door softly, like I was closing the chapter on a book I no longer wanted to read. But I wasn't finished. Not yet, because Michael wasn't the only one who owed me the truth. There was still her, the woman behind the whispers, the laugh that had haunted me for weeks, the one who thought she could take my life and wear it like a borrowed dress. And I knew exactly how I'd make her pay. I invited them both to dinner the following weekend, my voice as sweet as honey when I extended the invitation. Michael thought it was his chance to come clean on his own terms, to twist the story so I'd forgive him. And she came dressed to impress, slipping into my home as if she belonged there. I greeted her with a smile so calm, it disarmed them both. The table was set perfectly, candles lit, wine glasses polished until they shone, the roast filling the air with warmth. I let them sit side by side, their shoulders brushing, while I served the meal. My hands didn't tremble, not once, and when dessert was placed on the table, I slid the folder between them once more. Their laughter died instantly. The air turned sharp, heavy, impossible to swallow. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to throw a single plate. I just stood there, steady as stone, and watched their faces unravel with every piece of evidence laid bare. The woman's smirk faded, replaced with wide-eyed panic. Michael's head sank into his hands. And me? I simply poured myself another glass of wine, letting silence speak louder than any scream. But oh, my revenge, my true revenge, was only just beginning to unfold.